Hi, I'm Christian Toksdorf, and here's my 3 keys to learning presentation. So I'm just gonna start off right off the bat with my first key, and that is space retrieval. Space retrieval is essentially a studying method where you space out your time accordingly with minimal variation upon the topic, and via high amounts of repetition over the course of time, you slowly learn to memorize it better. Scientists find this better than block studying, where you study a large amount in one single study session, oftentimes the day before the test, because when we study it over a course and a period of time, our brain better is able to understand it and learn from our mistakes the next time so that we can slowly build off on that. So, I guess one example for me that this was especially important was, as I already mentioned, my Greek and Latin stems test. At the beginning of the year, we were given these 350 Greek and Latin stems that we had memorized by the end of the year. And I had heard from previous students that block studying was not going to work, that you cannot cram for this test, and that you have to proportion out your time accordingly. So, what I did was I set a schedule that every Tuesday of every week I would study for at least 1 hour with these Greek and Latin stems, starting from the beginning of the year all the way to the end of the year. And as you probably would have predicted, at the beginning, I didn't really know all that much, and I was a little bit behind on the line stems because it was 350 and I didn't have that much time. But slowly, over the course of time, and as I was able to study more and more and get those block sessions in, then I was able to ace the test at the end of the year when we had all 350 stems. So that was a great example of me using space retrieval to help me. And it hasn't just been when you have to memorize words. It also has to do with, I guess, a little bit more analytical and diverse concepts such as math, where it's not just remembering the words that you can write down. Like, I had a geometry final my 8th grade year, and I had to study really hard for it. But I didn't just want to study a single concept at that time. I didn't want to just have that big chunk of final cramming that every high schooler has to do. So what I did was that on top of the block studying sessions that I had for on Tuesdays, I also on Thursdays would study for at least half an hour on Thursday and Friday for my geometry final for each midterm. And I got 100 on both of the finals. So I guess that's a great example of me applying my space retrieval to my life. And I'll go ahead with the next one, elaboration. Elaboration is an additionally great studying method because it's where students have to elaborate and work through the problems to kind of find the underlying meaning in order to grasp a better idea of the concept. So this is especially helpful for speeches. When I was doing my speech at the end of 8th grade as my last elective, I was known to be a great speech person, and that kind of put a little pressure on me to work really hard. And I didn't want to just practice my speech and write a good speech and then that would be it. I wanted to understand what I was saying so that I could relate it to the audience, because how am I supposed to expect the audience to understand what they're saying if I don't even understand myself? So what I would do is that every time I wrote a speech, I would do a little bit of additional research. And I would think about why this concept was so highly debated. Why would I need to know this concept? And I guess one topic of this was when we were doing a debate during speech class over electric cars versus gas-fueled cars. I was obviously for electric cars, but I wanted to not just write this great speech. I wanted to understand how this really applies to the real world. So I would do additional research, and over time I was able to beat some of the best debaters in my class in that speech. And that was the end of my 8th grade speech term. So that's, I guess, another example of how I was able to apply it to the real world situation. And I didn't just memorize the knowledge, but I wanted to apply it so that I could grasp a true understanding of the true reason why I needed to know that information. And I guess the last key to my learning is interleaving. And interleaving is a really good studying concept because it allows for variation to occur, and interleaving is essentially where we interleave, so the term says, but interleaving means that we influence different concepts when we are trying to learn one single concept. For example, when we're learning grammar, we aren't just going to learn grammar, we're also going to learn how to read and write, and we're going to learn all these different concepts so that we can kind of apply it. So I guess like one example of that for my 8th grade year, I grew a lot, and I had to adapt to this new way of performing speeches. And this was at the beginning of 8th grade, before my last 8th grade speech term. And my teacher would tell me, Christian, you need to catch up on your grammar a little bit, make your sentences a little bit more fluid, because I want to prepare you for high school. I want to prepare you for these harder classes. So I said, yeah, I have to accept the challenge in that sense. So instead of just going to IXL and studying that concept, that grammar, I also read a lot. And I wanted to study how these famous authors like Mark Twain and all the greats wrote. So I would read their books, and I would read novels like The Count of Monte Cristo, and I would understand how they were able to write. And I wouldn't just study the grammar of it, I wouldn't just study the mechanics, I would study the real world application and what happened when that came to fruition. And that really helps me to develop a sense of understanding of how it would apply to the real world. And it really helps you when you are able to influence all these different topics, because when you're just studying the one topic, you don't really have that much connections, and you're using your schema when you're building those connections, and it becomes engraved in your brain that, oh yeah, this certain formula will relate to physics, which relates to geometry, and so on and so forth, like Pythagoras' theorem. You learn that in math, but it can apply to architecture, and that'll help you for your future if you want to be an architect or something like that. So again, it's all about building connections with that, and I hope you enjoyed. So I kind of want to explain my visualizations at the end. So for space retrieval, this was me on my Quizlet progress when I was studying my Latin and Greek stems. Probably can't see it very well, but I'll share the image with you. And it shows the growth that I had over the course of time and how it helped me by having those spaced blocks. Elaboration, this is, again, me trying to explain to myself what is the true meaning and justification behind what I'm doing. So I just drew a little visualization there. And here is me, which was another example of interleaving, trying to use different topics and different concepts in order to have a better and truer understanding of some of the historians and how what they did in their past lives applies to all these different concepts that we have today. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed.